This is part 2 of the May 8th orchard tour. Right next to those huckleberry bushes, right here we have another persimmon tree with some persimmons on it. This is a gyro persimmon. It's one of the non-astringent varieties. The non-astringent varieties of persimmon trees tend to be a little bit smaller than the astringent varieties. You can see the persimmons on the tree. There's actually quite a number of them. I don't know that this tree can support that many persimmons at this stage, but persimmons drop off when the trees are young. So whether it ripens any of these is a it's a coin toss. I don't know whether it will or not. If I keep it watered well enough, or if it rains enough, maybe it will. Right next to the persimmon tree, we have this huckleberry bush, and we have this little tree here. This is one of the little citrus trees I added to the yard this year. This is a grand frost lemon, and I have another one in the backyard along with some grapefruit trees I added this year. But the grand frost lemon makes a it's part grapefruit, makes a huge lemon. They're supposed to be really good. It's more or less seedless. It's a GMO type. It's a genetically modified. They started out with an Ichang lemon, which is cold tolerant to about 6 degrees Fahrenheit, and they hit it with radiation, which made it seedless. And also, I think the quality on this is supposed to be better than the Ichang lemon. And so it is a GMO. I don't really mind that. I think there's a lot of stigma around GMOs that just doesn't make any sense to me. I get it if a plant is genetically modified to allow you to use pesticides on it. The issue is the pesticides, the dangerous pesticides that you can use on that plant, not the fact that it's a GMO. To me, people being all up in arms about plants being genetically modified just makes no sense to me whatsoever. Humans have been breeding plants and even doing interspecific crosses with plants for thousands of years and improving them. And if you're improving a plant to make it where it can take the climate in Georgia and that it has better tasting fruit, with better shelf life and other qualities, then hey, why not do it? Why not use every tool that we have in order to produce good fruit? The stigma against GMOs just makes no sense to me whatsoever. Here's a little pear in my yard. This is a variety that has existed for a couple of years in branches in pear trees. I finally removed a pear and the Purdue pear, and actually grafted this into a sucker that suckered up from the root of the Purdue pear. The root would have been a flowering pear, a calorie pear, and so I just grafted the Savannah pear into it. This is going to be a late blooming variety, and I'm discovering the later the blooming, the better. And it may be late ripening as well, which would extend my pear harvest. It's starting out as a little tree. It's going to be quite a few years before I have any pears from it. Here in the orchard we have this is the Tennessee pear. This is a hybrid between the Hosui Asian pear, which is not a variety that can take our climate, and the Tennessee pear, which I'll show you in a bit. I have a Tennessee pear, and this tree, I thought maybe it would bloom this year, but it hasn't. It looks healthy and it should bloom next year, and I look forward to getting some pears in it next year. Hopefully next year will bear. This is a scarlet pear. It was planted the same time as the Tennessee. It's not mature yet. It bloomed about 3 clusters of flowers, but they didn't make any pears. Part of the issue is that nothing bloomed with it. It's such a late bloomer None of the other pears were blooming, so it didn't have a pollination partner. Tennessee will bloom with it, and so will the Savannah pear eventually bloom with it. And then it will have a pollination partner. And the thing that these pears are going to do is they should extend my harvest into later in the season. And also the late blooming quality will help make sure that at least some pears, in years when we get late frost, this will help make sure that some pears make it through that late frost. Moving right along, we have come to the Sage-O persimmon tree, which lives right in front of my car. And the Sage-O is an astringent variety of persimmon tree. This young tree is about 3 or 4 years old. It's actually doing very well. It just hasn't produced any flowers yet. It's still acting immature, and I don't have any fruit from it yet this year. I look forward to it. It's one of the Asian astringent types. The persimmons are kind of small. They're supposed to be very high quality though, and I look forward to eventually getting persimmons from it. Now we're at the 2 oldest pear trees that I planted. Now there are 2 giant pear trees in the backyard that are on my late grandmother's property that my dad planted that are over 60 years old. But these are the 2 oldest trees that I planted. And I just picked some huckleberries. They're really good. I mean, you gotta graze when you go through the yard, you know? You got huckleberries and they're just right in front of you, and they're as sweet as these. You just gotta nibble a little bit. That's part of the fun of looking through an orchard. Very tasty. The Tennessee pear is not the most productive pear tree in my orchard so far. Although it's doing better this year than most of the typically early ones. And the reason it is, in terms of having fruit on it, is because it bloomed late this year. Tennessee has kind of a high chilling requirement on it. And I think it needs a good 600 hours to bloom properly. And this year, we got the chilling hours, but it was late happening. The coldest general part of the year, I mean, just where you had days and days and days of getting chilling hours. It was not, thankfully, not freezing all that time, but enough where you're between that magic temperature of 48 degrees and 32 degrees where you're clocking chilling hours. And that happened at the time of year when Tennessee normally blooms. And so what it did was simply wait, and it bloomed with, instead of blooming with Southern Bartlett and Acres Home and Granny Durden and Winnie, it bloomed with LeConte and Golden Boy. And because it did that, like them, it actually made pears. I had to finish this part of the video a couple of days later on account of that lawnmower that cranked up right next to where I was standing and doing that video. It was just too much noise. Anyhow, there is the Tennessee pear tree again, and right next to it is the Southern Bartlett pear tree. Southern Bartlett is one of the earliest blooming of my pear trees, and on account of it being such an early bloomer, it's prone to getting yacked by frost. It's one of the more prone ones to getting yacked by frost, just because it blooms some years before winter is really finished. It does have a few pears on it. This year what happened is we had a a few light frosts while it was blooming, but I think the biggest thing, it wasn't really cold enough to yak the fruit from the frost itself. But what I do think happened is that we just had days and days and days of cold weather, and the flowers just did not get pollinized very well, did not get pollinated by bees very well. And probably the pollen tubes just didn't grow fast enough to get fertilization. There are a few pairs on it, not enough really to do anything with, but this is the first tree to ripen fruit in a season, and so I will, most likely get some early pears just for fresh eating, and that would be about the extent of it for this tree. This year, that is. Now, next to it, kind of behind it, is another tree I want to talk about before we resume the part of the video that we did on May 8th. This right here is the Southern King pear tree. This tree was also planted at the same time that I planted the Tennessee pear and the scarlet pear. And this tree is actually a sibling of, not this literal tree here, but the variety is a sibling variety to the Tennessee pear. The seeds that produce this variety, the mother tree of this variety, were collected at the same time from the same tree that the seeds that the seed that produced the Tennessee variety came from. And the mother tree is the Tennessee pear. So this is the Tennessee pear right here. And not much of a family resemblance, as best as I can tell. Tennessee pear is kind of a red pear. And these don't look like they're going to be red pears. There's actually a few pears on this tree this year. It's the only one of the trees that are the age of the trees that I planted at the same time that I planted the Tennessee pear and the scarlet pear that's making pears already. So this seems to be a little bit earlier in production. Hopefully the others will produce next year. But I'm actually very excited about the prospect of getting to try these pears. Southern King is supposed to make very small pears, kind of like Tennessee, but they're supposed to be just especially high in sugar. It's probably going to be counted as one of the sugar pears, like Ayers and Suckle and so on. We shall see. I'll have a much better concept of what the Southern King pears will be like in a few months. Now I'm going to transition you to where the May 28th video is going to pick up on the opposite side of the property, away from the guy mowing the lawn that's across the street. I am now on the back side of the property, looking at the plum trees again. This is a two multi-variety grafted plum trees. They're all on Tools heirloom root. This is actually the root of a tree that was here on the property before I moved back, and I cut it down because the tree was diseased. Two suckers came up, and they were healthy enough that I was able to graft other varieties onto them. Actually, one of the suckers ended up being my Tools heirloom tree, which is in another part of the yard, and I've already talked about it a little bit on this video. This tree has some Robusto grafted into it, which is the same, and that's what this little fruit is right here. There's a few Robusto plums on it. It's got all kinds of different plums on it. One of the ones that's grafted into it is Guthrie. Now I have a Guthrie tree but it only has a couple of plums, and those have curculios in them. But this one here on this multigraph actually have some healthy Guthrie plums. So I'm gonna get to try two types of improved Chickasaw plums that I've never tasted before this year. I'm going to get the chance to try some Guthrie plums and some McKibben plums, and I'm very excited to do that. I expect them to be okay, or as good as Tools Heirloom, but I really don't know. People say they like them, so I'm going to be experiencing them for the first time this year, and that makes me very happy. This is a little plum tree that hasn't made anything yet. It should have, and it's called Excelsior. This is not the Excelsior Chickasaw plum. This is an American plum, Asian plum hybrid. And I tell you what, the jury is out on whether or not our climate, whether or not we get enough chilling hours for this variety to bloom properly. So far it hasn't. This little tree here is it's grafted, and the scion on this is from what is supposed to be a Bowie plum. Bowie plum is an improved Chickasaw plum that was preserved and improved by a local family here in Bullitt County, last name of Bowie. And that's all I know about this little tree. We shall see. I mean, it'll be a few years before we know what it produces. This is a wild Chickasaw plum, which is there for pollination. This right here is a Mariana root that has grafted onto a Sprite plum. Most of this is Sprite, and there's one branch right here, this low-growing branch is a wild Myrobalan plum, and that's grafted in as a source of pollen for this Sprite plum. I say it's Sprite. The person who sent me the Cyanwood says he might have gotten mixed up, and it might turn out to be Delight. That's another, that's also a cherry plum variety, and they're similar to one another, and we shall see. This little plant here, this little plum tree here is one of my grafts. It is one of the flea market plums. I think that's a flea market 2, and I have a flea market 1 over there where the vegetable garden is, and they all were given to me by Carl Moore, and they're just they're plums that he bought at a flea market. They were actually labeled as apricots. They look like Chickasaw type plum trees, but the plums on them are dark, like they might be Asian plums, so I'm guessing they're a hybrid of some sort. Speaking of hybrids, this is the Winnie. The fruit is Asian type, but it's really a hybrid, Southern pear. It's a sand pear, European pear hybrid. This is Granny Durden. Granny Durden's not doing too well. Several of the bottom limbs got really bad case of leaf spot this year and have lost their leaves, and I'd say half the tree looks nearly dead. So I don't know. I don't know if how this tree is going to do long term. It's not doing well. It doesn't seem to be adversely affecting the other trees. I gotta cut those limbs out though. And then once that happens, there won't be a single limb on the tree that I could reach a pear on. Oh well, that's life. Sometimes these things happen. Well, moving right along. I mentioned Guthrie tree. This is it. As I said, it has a few plums in it. I think curculios have gotten all of them. So I don't expect much from this tree this year. Next year it should produce a full crop. These are my sunflowers. They're doing pretty good. Boy, I had a hard time getting the seeds to germinate. So there's actually about 3 different kinds of sunflowers in here. The point of planting sunflowers is that when you get a sunflower bloom, the leaf-footed bugs are attracted to them, and then you can spray a pesticide on them and get rid of them. And over time, you can kind of reduce the population of leaf-footed bugs, which are very damaging to some of your other crops, such as especially to citrus. There's some eggplants that I have planted in my garden. This is a, we called it a tree search yellow. The person who gave me this tree finally got fruit on his, and it has turned out to be a wild type Chickasaw plum. Nothing special, but it will produce pollen, and that's a good thing. This is a Phipps yellow planted right next to it. I will probably move that one, and whether I move this one into the spot or just leave it where it is kind of an open question right now. It is a little close to that Guthrie, and it is a little closer than I would want it to be to these blueberry bushes, but this one would be a better distance. Having it here from the Guthrie, it really doesn't make much difference in terms of the blueberry bushes though. It's just going to be close. That's the problem. I've run out of space in my garden and orchard. Right here we have a row of sweet potatoes and a couple of peppers at the end. We've got some chili peppers and just my vegetable garden in general. It's doing so-so. I mean, I'm not the best vegetable gardener in the world, I'll be honest with you. I do way better with fruit trees. This is the other flea market, and this little plum tree is doing really well. Not as well as his neighbor though. This is one I got from Brad Harper. We're calling it Sonny's Yellow. This is an improved Chickasaw plum. Has huge leaves though for a Chickasaw plum. Look at the size of those leaves, enormous leaves. It's a yellow plum. He got it from, it originated with an Uncle Sonny. I don't know Uncle Sonny, but there is a Sonny that another plum tree on the property originates from, and it could be the same person because Uncle Sonny lives in the same part of the state as the one where this other tree originated from that another third person had and gave to me. Stay tuned. This tree here is kind of drooped over because it's wet. I had to turn off the watering system so I can get in here. This is a Dot Piazza Chickasaw plum, and this particular little tree also, there's an older lady in town, friend of my mom's, Dot Piazza, who gave me this tree, and she got her tree from a nephew by the name of Sonny. And same age guy and same general location. I think it's the same Sonny as the Uncle Sonny that the Harpers or the Sonny's Yellow came from. So anyway, it may or may not be. This has pinkish fruit because I've seen the fruit that the Dot Piazza, the original Dot Piazza tree has. It also has reddish or pinkish, kind of a magenta colored flesh. That was part 2 of the May 8th orchard tour. Please stand by, and part 3 will be posted shortly. Please click like and subscribe. Thanks. God bless. Bye.